Luckily, the temperature outside has come up just enough to bring the temperature in my shop up, so now it's time to do a little bit of welding on the floor of the cab. Remember to always disconnect your batteries before you do any welding on the truck. Have your favorite fire extinguisher at the ready. And of course, we don't want the sound dampener to catch fire on the bottom of the truck, so in the area that I'm welding, I've scraped off the sound deadener. Well, step one, unfortunately, is commandeering an old hairdryer so I can get the metal heated up so that I can get a little coat of paint in between the two layers where I won't be able to get later. Next, I wanted to put a little layer of polyurethane adhesive sealant in between the two layers. This is what I use as a seam sealer. Having a little bit of trouble because it was so cold in the shop, but basically there's way more going on here than I would need. The idea here is not to get a full seal and to keep it away from the edge of where the welds are going to be, but get enough in there that once things are pushed tight together, I'm not just trying to force sealant in from the outside. So a little layer, keeping it away from where the welds are going to be, and then we can put the piece in place. Now that we've got that smoothed out, dropping the piece into place here, and we'll put the little sheet metal clamps on to hold it in place while we're welding it. So these slide in through the gap, which is why I wanted to make sure I had a gap, and there's a little bar that slides in the back before you tighten it down from the top. What this does is it keeps the two pieces of plate at the same level, so when you weld it, you get a nice flush weld. Now these clamps do have some other adjustability in case you're using different thicknesses, but I have everything basically set to be flush on the top so that when I put the clamp in place, it keeps the two top surfaces flush with each other, which is what we want so that we get a flat seam once it's welded. I just run my finger along the edge of the plates and adjust it a little bit so that we know it's flush all the way around, and then we'll be ready to weld. Just to double check, and we can see we've got a nice seam all the way around there. This is the welder that I'm using. It's a 110 volt powered machine. I'm using argon CO2 mixed gas 023 wire, and my voltage and wire speed are both set between 5 and 6. With everything in place, what we want to start with is a couple of very small tacks, just to make sure that when we do start making things solid, nothing moves to where we don't want it. It's much easier to remove a very small tack and reposition things. So I've got one tack in the middle there, another one at the front corner. I'm going to get a couple more tacks in place, and then we'll remove the clamps, make sure everything is still flush, and just start going to town. So with the clamps out of the way, what we want to do is work our way around in small spots all the way around. Don't want to do a big long weld because that will start pulling. Once we've got tacks all the way around, you can see I'm doing some longer welds here, and they're kind of ugly, but the idea here is this is all going to get ground off in the end anyway. The number one thing I'm looking for is penetration. You can see I've got a bit of a big gap here, and I've actually used an aluminum block in the back as a spacer because I can't weld steel to aluminum, and that helps fill the gap. There we go, nice and ugly, ready to grind down. And so here I am just using a 2-inch flat disc on an air power grinder, and it's probably 60 or 80 grit. All I'm doing here is trying to take off the excess weld material. I don't want to go down farther than the surface of the plate at all. So there will be areas where I need to do some re-welds because I didn't quite get it. So you can see a couple pinholes there, and there'll be a couple spots that are low. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking a dolly to the back side of this, and those two circles that are drilled in there, I'm going to put a weld in, and then I'm going to hit it with my air hammer while pushing up on the back with the dolly. And then I'm going to hit the second one with the welder and then push it down with the air hammer while I'm pushing back on the back with the dolly. All I'm trying to do here is make sure that these two pieces are as tight together as possible. So the first little weld, as soon as I can, as fast as I can, hit it with the air hammer while pushing on the back, and this just forces those two pieces together. Now realistically here, I probably could have done a little better if I just had a hammer instead of my air hammer, but I wanted to give it a try. This method you may have heard if you've been around welding. It's called tack and whack, where you put the tack in while it's still hot, you whack it with the hammer, and this forces the two pieces together. So taking a quick look after that's cooled off a little bit, I see that I have actually made it a little bit uneven. So what I'm going to do next is very light work with the air chisel, and I'm just going to kind of flatten out the front edge so that we can get it back to level. When I hit it with the air hammer the first time, it kind of compressed it in some areas and not in others. So right now I'm just trying to even it out along the front to pinch that seam together a little. And I'll do the same thing on the back when I get to working on the back side. So this is just more cosmetic, squishing down that seam into the sealant and making it a tighter seam so we don't have an issue with moisture getting in there in the future. Time to grind down those little spot welds, and then what I'm going to do is fill in any of the little pinholes, and I'm going to be looking from the backside in the wheel well and using the light to see where the pinholes are. Get all the little pinholes filled, grind all the excess off again, and what we're left with is a newly repaired floor.
Well, there you have it. One spot done, only about 12 more to go. See you next time.